disposal, to me, would be a real blow to my standard of living. A lot of people go down to one car. But for me, I'd give up lots of other things to have the car, because the car, to me, is such a big increment in my standard of living. The fact that I can go where I want to go when I want to go.
But does it have to be the latest
No,
car that everybody
no.
looks at you and says, "Oh, look at that car that Ed's driving"?
No, it's just
Does
got
it
to be
have
something
that,
that
or
gets
does
me
it
there.
have to be a car that runs?
It's got to run, it's got to have heat, and it's got to,
Well, it has to have heat.
and it's got to have windshield wipers. I mean, again, it's got to be a certain level of car. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's take a moment, take a breath.
But
and
wait a
Count
minute.
three?
If
Yeah.
we're going to try and have it more looking, should I move over here so
Yes,
if he's?
I've asked you to do that.
I'm sorry.
All right.
Turn that so he can't see it, so he quits looking at himself.
Hi there.
Okay.
Okay.
But I wasn't going to be in the picture, but he was. I am going to be talking to him.
Okay.
You're gonna try not to step on him.
I'm gonna
Right.
try.
And I want to talk first. I want to talk a little bit first before you start asking me questions. All right, and then we'll do the questions.
You want
Okay.
to talk first.
Well, I want to talk about some of the things that influenced my life.
How's it? Is this better? So when you're looking at me, how's you going to be looking in? Is that better?
Well, you can come over here and sit down and get one of these other chairs. Sit over here closer to the camera.
Well, we don't want the light to be right in his eyes, but I wanted you to be looking more. Yeah, I like
Like
this
that?
better.
Yeah.
All right.
Can you be doing that?
Yeah.
I got to get myself in.
Hey, you can look over at the camera occasionally, as long as you can stand the light.
Okay.
Oh, no, what are you doing, Mike? Now you moved everything again.
I would like you to listen to the sound. Sweetheart,
You want me to? No, I don't.
You have to be
No,
doing this at
no,
the same time.
I don't have to.
Concentrate on your job.
Yes, I do.
Do me a favor.
Oh, am I supposed to be talking to you?
Tape is running. You can do it. You
Oh.
count to three before you start everything. Before you start anything, count to three, and we will put this on pause. I didn't get it on pause. Hello. Hi. Okay. Okay. Bye.
Why will it not go on?
Don't worry about it.
Oh, that was weird.
Slow it. Because it's recorded.
Okay. As I finished the last session, it dawned on me that one thing that I ignored completely were some of the factors and authors that influenced my life, that caused me to move in the directions I moved. And one of the first instances of this was an introduction to philosophy course. And the first article that we read, the first book that we read, had a very profound effect on my life. It was called The Protagoras. And the Protagoras is a dialogue between Socrates and a guy by the name of Protagoras. And Protagoras has a school that he's traveling around the countryside with, trying to teach people. He's advertising that he can teach people things. And Socrates attacked him for being a charlatan, because Socrates claimed that you can't teach anybody anything. And so as this dialogue progresses, the question arose, how do I teach anybody anything? What do I do? What's the impact on education? And it struck me that here we are 3,000 years later, figuring out the same problem that the Greeks were dealing with 3,000 years ago. And I got to thinking about this, and it struck me that this is an interesting kind of problem. The problems that I was encountering as an engineer were, in a sense, kind of cookbookish, and they were They were problems that could be solved. Somebody said to me, I need a power supply of such and such. And I could sit down and draw it up and make it. And it became, I felt, kind of trite, kind of trivial. It didn't seem to be worth my brain power to be really working on this thing. As I said, it's a good source of income because people want power supplies. But in terms of challenging your mind, I found engineering to be very unsatisfying as a challenge to my mind. And problems, philosophical problems that had existed down through the centuries really became interesting because mankind, personkind, had not been able to solve these problems. The fact that we still got them is a pretty good indication that they are not solved yet. And perhaps there's not a solution to them. But this began my movement, I think, away from engineering as a field. So instead of reading Scientific American, I began to read books on psychology, sociology, anthropology, trying to understand why people do what they do, why they act the way they act, why they believe the way they believe. The next author that had a tremendous effect in my life was a man by the name of Viktor Frankl. Frankl wrote a book called From Death Camp to Existentialism, and his argument was that what we all need is some purpose in life. Some of his favorite phrases were, he who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. The adversity that we can overcome is directly proportional to why we want to overcome it. And his answer to many of the world's problems was, we as individuals need to find some purpose in life, some reason for existence. Now, there's a problem with that because we all die. And so the existential problem then is, how do I make sense out of life with death as a backdrop? And so the individual is living with this constant knowledge of death and still goes on learning and thinking and attempting to make sense out of a life that oftentimes seems senseless. So in a philosophical sense, I became what I would call a religious existentialist. People like Kierkegaard had a great effect on my life. And the nihilists, Camus and Sartre and people like this, I found very negative in their thinking, a universe that makes no sense, I had a hard time with. And so I continued to move, I think, in a direction of authors that were more what I consider to be positive, not quite Norman Vincent Peale, but certainly the individual responsibility of the person for their life, and still faced with problems of meaning, the meaning of existence. I think the next powerful work that came into my world was called The Grand Inquisitor by Dostoevsky, and was a monologue of the Grand Inquisitor with a Jesus that he just arrested and thrown in jail. I think that in terms of significance in my life,
He was? Do you know where you were?
Well, just start
Yeah.
with when you were talking about,
Yeah.
you just started a new subject.
yeah, I know where it was.
Okay, good.
Well, but start the new subject all over again.
All right.
Okay.
These authors and these books are what I would call significant emotional events in my life, because what they did was kind of change my direction in life. It seems to me that fundamental to everyone is the problem of the meaning of existence. How do I understand the meaning of my existence? Some people find it in the church, and some people find it in family. For me, it's been a quest for many, many years, and it really has to do with what do I do with my life? How do I spend my minutes and my hours, and by what measure? What measure do I use to determine what is of worth and what in an ultimate sense? And is there any ultimate sense, or is it all individualistic? Was fortunate to hear Frankl speak, and some of the things that he said left a lasting impression. For instance, that we humans generally have beliefs when we only have enough information to have opinions. That there's a marvelous book called "If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him." And in this, the author says that we always have to make decisions based on incomplete information. And life, therefore, is something which is we're always questing. Life is a constant quest for understanding, and for me in particular, what should I be doing? I think that the idea of a call in my life is something that's kind of been with me ever since a little kid. That there's something that I should be doing, which I need to find. People who are not religious say that's an artifact, and maybe it is. But if you have it, it's like a craving in you that says, I need to be doing something, and sometimes it's not clear what that something is. And I think that probably this explains the adventure on the in Liberia, the cattle boat, the habitat is kind of a quest for maybe immortality. Perhaps it's a desire to leave the world a little better off than it was when I came into it. I'm not even sure, but as the years have passed and unfolded, life has definitely continued to be very much concerned with trying to understand who I am and how do I fit into society and how does society fit into the world, challenging earlier beliefs about the way the world should work and govern, and so these kinds of questions remain with me constantly. Every time I get together with people who are thinking people, I continue to try to explore questions which many years ago I felt like I had the answers to. Today I'm not so sure. And so the quest for how I spend my minutes or my hours has been something that's a continuing world in which I live. I think that another book that had a very profound effect was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. The 100 or so pages on the school of learning. How do we learn? What happens when we learn? What is its effect upon us? I found to be a very profound discussion. And so it was that some of these books and some of these authors I felt a kinship to, and they have caused me to move in directions with my thinking that continuously are changing. Another significant emotional event, I think, was a visit to Auschwitz concentration camp. Having read about it, I was really not prepared for the experience that I had there. But what struck me was that this camp was a great manufacturing facility. The end product was the disposal of human beings. There are about 35,000 people a day died there. And the camp commander was a person who had the responsibility for this business. And up on one end of the camp was the engineering wing, and in the engineering wing were a group of engineers who were trying to figure out how to dispose of people more efficiently. They were on the cell doors. You can see experiments being run in terms of numbers of people, quantities of gas, time, and they were developing statistics for more and more efficient elimination of human beings. At the other end was the production facility where train loads of people were coming in every day, and the facilities in the camp were such that they had to get rid of 35,000 people a day. And trains were coming from all over Europe. And so the camp commander had this huge business that he was running. And if a oven broke down, or if one of the experiments didn't turn out so well, he ran out of gas. I mean, he had real production problems. And what struck me was that once you pierce the veil of morality, once you get past the moral issue, and the question simply becomes one of manufacturing or a functional element, this is no difference than if you're building bombs or guns or anything else. It's just the engineer who is working on the engineering problem, once he's past the moral issue, then it simply becomes a question of how do I manufacture the product? And in the case of this death camp, the product was simply the disposal of human beings. And I think I came away from that with a renewed fear of many of American businesses that deal in death, and how easy it is to dress people in suits and ties, let them evade the moral issue, and then simply deal with the question of cluster bombs or you name it, items of destruction, for which they take absolutely no responsibility except to make them better and more efficient and so forth. So I think that in terms of my unwillingness or concern with the type of job that I held, the Auschwitz experience had a very profound effect philosophically on my life. In recent years, I've been dealing more and more with Thomas More, with trying to figure out how to spend my remaining years. I look at my life expectancy now, which is perhaps 20 years, and it reminds me of Dad. Dad would come into me occasionally and say, "Hey, Ed, you know, according to the actuarial tables, I've got 1,000 days left to live. Does it make sense for me to be learning Spanish? Does it make sense for me to be studying?" He was studying the kings of England, and he was studying the museums of Europe and what paintings were in them. Does this make sense? If I'm going to die in 1,000 days, does it make sense? And I think today I'm very much engrossed in that same kind of problem. I've got maybe 20 years left to live. What makes sense for me to do? How should I be spending those minutes? And I think that this question of time, which is really the most valuable possession that we have, is something that it's not a fearsome thought. It's a question of, if I have this amount of time, what is the best use I can make of it, and how do I determine what best is? What does that mean when I talk about doing things that are worthwhile? What things are worthwhile? How does one make the decision? And so here at this late stage of life, all of the same kinds of problems that everyone has, I wrestle with daily. I wake up early in the morning and try to wrestle with, should I take a grandkid to a movie? Or should I go help somebody fix something? Or should I study Spanish? And it's the same question everybody has. How do I make a use of life? I think that one thing that I can truthfully say is I'm never bored. That I always have more things to do than I can possibly do, which causes me also some consternation. Again, going back to my father, I can remember him at 83 or 84, and I'd ask him, have you worked on your stamps? No, he'd say, I'm too busy. I've got too many things to do. I'm saving that when I get old, or I break a leg and I'm laid up. And like him, my stamp collection has sat now for 10 years or more. I haven't done anything with it. And I keep waiting for either to be laid up or something to get back to my stamps. And it's kind of interesting, because it's almost like history repeating itself. And yet, then I wonder, why can't I? Why can't I just sit down and work on my stamps and forget trying to learn about things or building houses or something? And so life goes on. trying to make goals and trying to put sense into a life where there's just not enough information yet to make sense. And one of my heroes, Bertrand Russell, said on his 90th birthday, "At last I know enough so that I can begin to learn." And I think that I keep trying to get to the point where I know enough that I can begin to learn. And with that, I'm going to throw the floor open to questions. And I've got a questioner waiting.
Yes, I'm Ed's younger sister, Alice, and this is February the 5th, I believe, 1995. We had never said what date this was. I think it's good to have it on there. You've said so many things that I wanted to say something to, but I was trying to be really good.
Good.
Anyway, the last thing that you were just talking about is also a problem I have, and it always shocks me whenever I hear anybody say that they're bored. And especially, I guess, I get so distressed when I hear little children talking about being bored.
This tape is not here, thank you. Asking questions.
I can't talk?
No,
Oh. Well, I want to talk.
too bad.
See.
First, I want to ask you, going back to what you were talking about Auschwitz, and I had never thought about it the way you just described it about being a manufacturing or production thing, and then thinking about it in terms of building big atomic bombs or neutron bombs or whatever. Is there really any vast difference, or is it only that the people that build the bombs never have to see the people? So, you know, we think this is so, I mean, it's so awful to me to think about these German officers that were right there seeing these people. But then we have people building bombs that are totally for the destruction of human beings, but we think of them as being more moral or something.
Yes. The question you raise, I think, is how do I rationalize the good from the bad? You know, what makes a good person? Are there just wars and are there unjust wars? And dropping the atomic bomb, as you know, right now there's this tremendous controversy over the Enola Gay, and the question of the dropping of the atomic bomb, and was it right or wrong or justified? I think the point I was trying to make is this, that if we sweep aside debate over the moral issue, and we simply address ourselves to technical issues. For instance, I was told that they could fire a missile from New York City, and they could hit the home plate at the baseball field in San Francisco. They could hit within 1 foot of home plate. Now, in order to do that, you have to have a guidance system that's very accurate. And the engineers who are developing the guidance systems, whether they're putting a spaceship up or whether they're directing a missile, are concerned with accuracy. They're concerned with control. They're concerned with the electronics and the communications with this device. And they're really not concerned with whether that missile is going to hit a city, an orphanage, or whatever. That's not part of their job. Their job is to direct this activity. And I think that it's very easy to look at a camp like Auschwitz and condemn the people, the guards and so forth that worked there. And I'm sure many of them were sadists in their own right. But I think that also, if you really believe that these people were enemies of the state, they were out to destroy you, that people can be very ruthless with other people. It's what Martin Buber called the I, thou, I, it concept, that people that we relate people to, people that are like ourselves, we have a relationship which is the I, thou relationship. We see them as people. People that we don't, whether it's because they have different religions or they have different color or whatever it is, that Buber called the I-it relationship. They're simply objects. And we have no more compunction about disposing of them than we would of disposing of a chair, because we don't see them as people, we see them as objects.
We have to think of them as being inhuman, right?
That's right. We think of them as being inanimate objects which are not human. And of course the Germans, you remember, classified Eastern Europeans as subhumans. You also may be aware that when Americans, British, or French soldiers were captured, they were put into army prisoner of war camps, which were controlled by the German army. Russian prisoners of war who were subhumans were put into concentration camps under control of the SS because they were not considered to be as high an order human as an American, for instance.
A Russian.
A Russian wasn't. So Russian soldiers, one of the things that made the Russians fight so desperately was they knew what would happen to them if they were captured. And therefore the resistance on the part of the Russians precipitously stiffened against the Germans when they realized they'd be starved to death if they were taken prisoners, whereas the Americans, British, and French had a much better life as captured prisoners than Russians did. So, yes.
So, in effect, when I get out my spray gun and spray all these armies of ants that come around in my kitchen, I don't have any feeling
That's right.
personally about the killing of these ants.
That's right.
And you are saying that it would be possible for these German soldiers to have this same feeling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They had no more compunction about killing a Jew or a Pole or a Russian than they would of stepping on an ant. It was the same. They did not see them as human beings.
So you can still feel like they might have been loving fathers to their children?
Well, they were. They would go home. They were very loving parents to their children. They had pets and dogs, and they would go to dances and Christmas parties. And it's kind of interesting that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who happens to be another person who had a tremendous effect on my life, in his book Letters from Prison, talked about the fact that here he was in prison in a concentration camp because he had spoken out against Hitler. And what he couldn't understand was, why was he there and tens of thousands of people were going to church every Sunday morning and singing and praying and putting money into the collection plates? Why weren't they in the concentration camps with him? And so he came to the conclusion that there are very few Christians, because if they were Christians, that's where they would be. They would be with him in the concentration camps. Now, you can translate this into our own society if you think about the Civil War and the decision on the part of Methodist Church South to support slavery, that the black person carried the mark of Cain. And it was God that had ordained that these people would be slaves. And of course it was the German argument that the Jew carried for having killed Jesus, carried the blood upon themselves, and it was they who were responsible for their own destruction. So the way we deal with other people, and all you got to do is look at Martin Luther King in Montgomery with the dogs being sicked on him and the police beating him up, that makes you realize that it can happen there and it can happen here. It's all a matter of degree. I think the American Japanese that were picked up in 1942 and put into camps, although the conditions weren't like they were in Germany and they weren't exterminated like they were in Germany, still the basic principle was that these people were deprived of their livelihood. The women, I read, a pregnant woman, for instance, couldn't go into a hospital. She had to have her baby delivered at home because they were outsiders. They were not like us. They were people to be shunned, like lepers and so forth. And so man's inhumanity to man, I think, is seen in all kinds of areas, and it was carried to its extreme, obviously, in places like Auschwitz. Okay.
You have it still going then?
Yes, but I didn't get this light changed.
Okay.
I see.
It's changed the shadows. I've been trying to figure out what's wrong with the shadows.
Oh. Is that better? Now look.
Figure it out.
You like that shadow better?
Now I get some of the light. Not the harsh.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Well, You,
Wait,
you,
wait, wait, let me change. Oh, yes, I do need to do it. What was that before? Okay.
I woke up at 5 this morning with all kinds of thoughts going around in my head, and you've already talked a lot. It's interesting to me on the same subject that I was going to begin with. I had this very lovely Christmas card that I got from Fran Dungan
Yes.
years ago that I kept, and on the cover of it says, "Each of us has to believe that we can make a difference."
Yes.
And I kept it because it's very much what I believe.
Yes.
That it seems to me without feeling like we're going to make a difference or we do make a difference,
Right.
then what is the whole reason of anything about life? And a lot of things that I do because I hope it's going to make a difference sometime, somewhere, So anyway, I wanted to ask you, you've spoken on this some, but where do you think, looking back on your life, that you've made the most difference, or where do you hope you've made the most difference?
Wow. That's a really tough question. I would go back to, again, Mom and Dad's experience and try to relate a little bit to that. Before they died, they put together a book called Stars in My Crown. And it was a book that consisted of letters from students that they'd had 20 years or 30 years earlier. And in this book, a student would write and say, gee, I want to thank you for having been my teacher when I was in high school. And I think that one of the things that's the most difficult to determine is what effect do you have on anything? What effect do I have on a kid or a person? Now, I believe that every person we come into contact with has some kind of an effect on us. I mean, we are an interactional system. And so when we do things, we can never know whether it does this much good or this much good. One of Dad's laments in his last years had to do with spending his life in China and seeing the buildings, the edifices destroyed, students that he taught killed. And he raised the age-old question, if and I think this is Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, if I build a building and I then destroy the building, has the effort been in vain, right? And then, so you have to decide, is it important for me to do it, or is it only important if I get what I want out of doing it? You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Maybe we
There's-
don't know.
We don't. There's a fascinating Greek story called the myth of Sisyphus, in which a Greek god angers Zeus and is condemned to roll a rock up a hill. And the rock is so heavy that if he doesn't push with all of his might, if he ever relaxes, the rock will roll backward and crush him. And so he rolls this rock up the hill. Now, when the rock gets to the top of the hill, it rolls back down, and he trudges down, and once again he puts his shoulder and he rolls the rock up the hill. And the question is, can he be happy with this kind of existence? And so I tried a poll one time at work. I went around asking people, here's the story. Could the guy be happy? Well, one person says, no, he can't be happy unless he can accumulate rocks. If he could roll a different rock each time, and pretty soon he has a pile of rocks, then he could see that he's accomplishing something. But to have to roll the same rock up, he couldn't possibly be happy. Okay. Another person said, no, you certainly can't be happy having this rock to roll. I mean, what is life if I've got to roll this rock. I mean, that's a terrible life. But if you stop to think about it, most of us live existences that are very repetitive. I mean, we wash dishes every day. We vacuum the rugs. We live lives where we're constantly rolling the rock up the hill. I mean, that's our daily life. And so the question of value, you know, what value am I? Let's suppose that I start a recycling program and it's very effective, or I build an orphanage, you know, I do great and wonderful things. And then they get destroyed. What has been the value of my effort? So I guess the answer to your question, it's a long answer, but I don't know. And I guess I really am not particularly concerned, because it seems to me that if, as you go through life, you do what you can when you have the opportunity and let other people be the judges. There's a marvelous philosophy which dates back to some 2,000 years, and an author by the name of Marcus Aurelius. And what he said basically was that what we ought to do is be concerned with the things over which we have control, like our temper, like accomplishments that we can do, and let other people be the judges. If we decide that what we really want is fame, we make a terrible mistake, because fame is something that's accorded to us by others. And what we need to distinguish between is what is it that's under our control and what is it that's in the hands of others. So I guess that the answer to the question, it was basically the response I gave to Dad, was there is no way you can measure to any degree of satisfaction, or that I can, of what the effect was of things that I did, only that I did them, and they are things that I wanted to do and that I felt were worthwhile, and then let other people judge what they are, because I think it's self-defeating to try to determine whether in fact you influence this person's life or that person's life, because those are things which are in a sense beyond your control.
So that's just what I was thinking too. Isn't it really the doing of the thing, the doing of it,
Yep.
because it's something you believe is important or matters,
Absolutely.
and whatever happens with it after that
Yeah.
doesn't really matter anyway.
That's right. Exactly.
The doing of it.
That's right.
You're stepping on me.
How about if I raise my hand and let you know? How do I
No,
avoid
just
it?
pause. Pause before you respond to him a little more.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Okay, to get on to some other thoughts that I just, and these are not really
Yep.
organized.
Start again. Okay,
Okay.
okay.
To
Right.
get on to some other thoughts, one thought I had was that you had talked about that you really, really like to do outdoor work and construction. You had mentioned that yesterday. And I thought maybe you could tell me a little bit more about interesting experiences you've had in building things. What things gave you the most joy? And then maybe go on to talk about any hopes and dreams you might have for any kind of construction projects that you might share with some of your children, your sons, for instance, or other people.
I like construction because I can see accomplishment very rapidly. I learned long ago that I'm really not a craftsman. I'm a practical constructionist. I like to build things that are useful. I like to build things that that are strong, that meet functional requirements. I do not have the patience to do what one would consider to be real craftsmanship. The joy of construction, for instance, in habitat, is the fun of working together with a group of people to erect a house in 5 days. It's it's challenging. It's long hours. In South Dakota, it meant wind, hail, rain, all kinds of adverse conditions. And in one sense, you'd look at it and you'd say, this is crazy. I mean, nobody would be out standing on a roof trying to put a piece of plywood up with the wind blowing 30 miles an hour because it'll blow you off the roof. But you've got a schedule that you're trying to meet, and in a sense, you have agreed to do it, and you do it. And the satisfaction, I think, comes on Saturday morning when you drive away and you see a house that somebody who's been living in a shack is now moving into, and you go on with your life. So what you've done is you've come into this person's life, impinged on it for a little bit, and in South Dakota, we worked with a woman who had 2 children, and she worked all week long, and so you could be and talk to her and see her and know that here was a person that was helped. And what you had done is you were one of a group of 1,000 people, because there's all kinds of logistics going on. It's a huge endeavor, and so here's this little town with 1,500 people coming into a little town and tents going up. I mean, it's a kind of an exciting thing. Okay, now if I do a project of my own, if I build something like a rocking horse for Ryan or something like that, that gives me satisfaction, because it's a personal presence, like somebody that paints a picture for you or something. It's something that I made for him, and so that gives me satisfaction that I've given him something which wasn't just money, but it was time and it was thought and so forth. So I don't know that once again that there is an answer to the question. I tend to live very much in the present. If I build something or do something like the house in Glendora, I can finish it and walk away from it, and I have no sense of loss because I enjoy building my carport or whatever it is. But once I leave it, it's irrelevant to me what happened to it. It's not. I'm not building an edifice to the glory, some plaque that said this is built by Ed Argelander. It's just I needed it at the time or wanted it, and so I put it together, and I find it very satisfactory to be able to do it myself with my hammer and my saw and my nails, and it gives me a feeling of kind of controlling. I'm not as dependent upon the rest of the world as I might be. Yeah.
So you wouldn't be the kind of person that would go back to a house that you had lived in and maybe planted trees and flowers and everything, and then go back some years later and see that people had pulled the trees up and everything changed. That wouldn't cause you pain.
Not at all.
It does cause many people pain.
Right.
When they go back and see something that they put a lot of love and care into, and so it seems better not to go back.
Right. Yeah, I don't look at life that way. For me, it's kind of, we were talking earlier about taking pictures, and then you don't look at them. I take lots of pictures, and they go into bags and they go into boxes, and I rarely look at them. And I think that the only life we have to live is the moment in which we're living it. Everything else is either past or future. And what you do or what you did last week, last month, last year, if you dwell on it, it robs you of the present. And so it seems to me the way you maximize life is by living in the present. So if I go back to a place that I'd lived and somebody has changed it, it's completely irrelevant to me. I have no emotional attachment at all to that thing. It's kind of like looking at a movie or something and saying, well, I know that some guy did this because I was the guy, but the guy that did it is not the same person that's looking at it, because the guy that did it no longer exists. I mean, every day, another book which which made a tremendous effect on me was Martin Luther's Liberty of a Christian Man. And he has a very wonderful thing in there in which he says that every morning we wake up, and in a sense we have to decide again whether we want to be a Christian that day. The fact that we wanted to be one yesterday is in a sense irrelevant unless we make the decision today that we want to do it. So what we have to do every day is renew the commitment that we made yesterday. And as Bob was saying the other day about, I guess it was my friend Jim was talking about storage media in our computer, that we need to rewrite it sometimes, do a defragmentation, because otherwise the media will begin to lose its imprint. And so what we need to do really on a regular basis is kind of renew the things that we believe. You know, do I still believe today what I believed yesterday? And I may not.
Well, this would be very fitting thing for a married couple then to ask themselves each morning or each person to say, do I really choose this today?
That's right.
Do I choose this today? I chose this the day I got married
Yep.
or yesterday
Yep.
or whatever.
That's right.
And to make this commitment every day.
That's right. Yep.
Not just.
Sure, because today is the only day I have to live, right? Now there certainly is a continuity in this whole thing, but an interesting game you might play sometime, and it's a very good adult game, is I used to believe. Take a group of people and say, let's play the game of I used to believe. And you start, and it's interesting the things that people used to believe that they don't believe anymore, you know. And one thing, especially in a singles group, that you hear is, I believed that when I got married, I was going to live happily ever after. Well, there's not very many people who have been divorced that believe that belief anymore. But generation after generation after generation comes along, and they enter marriage believing that once they get married, they're going to live happily ever after, right?
I was thinking about you talking about that you got married 3 times there.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was really,
That should have done it.
really married. But I think that we as we go through life, if we don't change, something is wrong with us. If we hold the same beliefs that we held when we were 10, something is wrong. So, okay.
Well, I believe that very strongly because I think if I had kept the beliefs that I had in my early 20s,
Yeah.
I probably would have lost every relationship with my children.
Sure.
If I hadn't been able to grow and change and accept them for the people that were and keep on loving them.
Right.
In spite of the fact that they might have been doing or saying things
Yep.
that were very painful or that I thought were destructive or hurtful.
Yep.
I would have lost all my relationships.
Yep.
I think that. So
Yep.
we have to. Well, I was thinking about this ungame that we played at your place and
Yep.
thinking, well, I just give you a little question like, now again, I guess as you said, if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. And we're not allowed to make fun of people.
All right.
You said that.
Yep.
Anyway, I was wondering if you could give me an example of at least 5 different things, events, experiences, or whatever that have given you joy in your life. Now, yesterday you mentioned that you love driving in the car.
Yep.
So that would be one.
Okay. Yes, values clarification. One of the things you do is you write down things that you really like to do. 10 things you really like to do. So off the top of my head, things that I really like to do. Now, I want to qualify, before I answer this, I'm going to qualify this because the second question you have to ask is, why don't you do it? Or do you do it all the time? And so if I were to say to you what I really like to do, I would say, I really like to play chess. I really like to play games. I really like to drive. I like to work on my stamps. And I just told you it's been 10 years since I worked on my stamps. So I guess that the correct response is not just what I think I'd like to do, but what I actually do. And if you want to know what you like to do, look at what you're doing. And I think that the correct answer to what do I like to do is, number one, I like to solve problems. I was trained as a problem solver, and I enjoy solving problems. I think the thing I enjoy most is sitting around and talking like we were at breakfast, discussing problems that don't seem to have any solutions, or if the solutions are there, they're only partial solutions that are really tough problems. You know, there's a lot of problems in life, like your relationships with your children, that sometimes they never seem to get to where you'd like them to get, but you're always working on them. It's a continuing process. So for me, discourse or dialogue is one of my favorite things, kind of like we're doing now, is sitting and trying to understand what another person thinks about the subject, because then it helps me think. Now, I am a firm believer that you can't convince anybody of anything. A man convinced against his will remains unconvinced still. We convince ourselves by thinking, but other people give us inputs. Other people influence us by things that they do, say, and so forth, and we keep feeding that in, and we keep mulling it around. So I would say that the thing I most like to do is sit and talk. I love to build things. I like to get involved in projects. I like to fix things that are broken. I like to. I love to go to movies. I like games. I like to play games. I like things that kind of challenge my mind. I don't read as much, but I like to listen to books on tape. So I like to constantly be getting input into my mind, and I like to help people. I think that if I go into somebody's house and like I got to Jim and Helen's not very long ago, and we spent the whole day. First I fixed his screen door so it would close, and then we went and bought a book stand and spent the day putting it together and putting it up. Now that to me is fun. That it's community activity. It's fun. I've gotten exercise, and at the end of the day I'm tired, but I feel good because somebody's life is better. Mine is better, but so is somebody else's.
So you enjoy, for instance, if you had the choice between fixing something or buying a new one, you would enjoy fixing it more than buying a new one.
Well, if something is broken, it bothers me to use things that are broken. I would much rather, if I have something that's broken, is go buy a new part and fix it and put it together and make it work. If the technology has advanced so that even fixing it no longer, like I had a 286, but it was a 286 computer that was made by Leading Edge, and you couldn't upgrade it because of the way they had made the motherboard. Well, I wanted to upgrade it, so what I did is I gave it away and I got myself a new one because it was not upgradable. But the answer is, yeah, I would if it's working, if it's good, if it's what I want, I would much rather fix it than go buy another one, because it bothers me to throw things away unless I can recycle them or give them away. I have trouble throwing it away.
Well, we have a lot of distress with this, and I see so much of just, it's broken, throw it away.
Right.
It's broken, throw it away.
Yeah.
And, yes?
You constantly step on him. You do not let him finish the last word.
So hard. You know how hard I'm trying to be good, raising my hand.
That's not the point. The point is you do not let him finish the word before you start.
I'll know when I'm in there editing,
You know what
won't
that's
I?
like
Oh.
when it comes
I
out
know.
to
Delay it.
edit.
When it comes to editing, it's a big headache.
Pause.
I'm
Okay.
going to try even harder.
Okay.
All right. I was thinking about the fact that this ungame helps you to get to know people better.
Right.
And thinking about the little small things that I discovered about some of the members of the wider family that I didn't know about. And thinking that in a small way, I try to do this same thing each year. I don't
Right.
know if you know that each year, about a month before Christmas, I send out wish lists to
Yeah.
all of my kids and my wider family. And I encourage them to put down exorbitant dreams, wishes, a castle in Spain, a sailboat, not just practical,
Yeah.
little practical
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
big things, unrealistic things,
Yeah.
dreams.
Yeah.
Emily is the greatest at
Yeah.
doing this
Yeah.
because it helps
Yeah.
me to know them.
Yeah.
So, if I was going to ask you to give me a wish list for
Yeah.
1995, what would you put on it?
Well, we kind of do the same thing. Every January, I make a list of things that I want to accomplish in 1995. Isabel makes a list of things she wants to accomplish, and then we have a list of things that we want to accomplish. And then every December we do accomplishments. We look at what we said we were going to do in January, and the things that are on my list. And this is a good example I was talking about earlier. For 5 years now, I've had on my list that I'm going to get my ham license. And each year I don't get my ham license. And each year I put it on my list for next year that I'm going to get my ham license. And I think this is proof of the fact that if you want to know what I really want to do, it's what I'm doing. And I keep saying, well, it hasn't gotten a high enough priority yet, which is obvious because I haven't done it. I believe that there are 3 things that I want to do this year. One of them is to do an elder hostel, go to an elder hostel program. The second is to do another Habitat for Humanity week. And thirdly is to take another cruise. So those are 3 things that are on my list. I have a longer term, we do goals we compartmentalize them. We have goals for me. I have goals for education. I have goals for family. I have goals for community service, and so forth. And so what we try to do is have goals in these different areas. And one of the things that I'm thinking very seriously about is going down to Costa Rica for 2 weeks and living in a home through a program through UCLA and or one of the universities in Costa Rica, and being immersed in Spanish for 2 weeks. So that's kind of something that I may accomplish this year. I'm also thinking about taking some computer classes, which is another possibility. And partly what I find is that life has a bunch of ingredients, and to me it's kind of like a diet. If I eat the same foods too much, then I get a hankering for some different kind of a food, maybe some shortage. And so what happens pragmatically is that when life gets too much sameness, then suddenly I begin to get this feeling that what I really need to do to balance my diet is one of these activities that was kind of low down will suddenly surface. Or like a friend of mine last year said to me, let's go to the Oktoberfest in Munich. Oh, it sounded like a good idea. So in September we went to Munich and we went to the Oktoberfest and really enjoyed it. And then we went on to Vienna and we went to Budapest. So I had 2 weeks in Europe. But at the beginning of the year, I didn't have the foggiest idea that during the year I was going to be back in Munich again. So I think that as I sit here today and I think about things that I'm going to do, the probability is that judging by the past, 60 to 70% of the things on my list I will do this year. But it's amazing how the time will kind of alter things, and new opportunities will arise. And I think that one of the things that's dominated my life has been the idea that when an opportunity comes along, is to try to grab it. It was like going to Africa. Suddenly I had this opportunity. Now I could have passed it up, or I could do it. But if it's something that I like to do and somebody makes it possible, the thing arises, suddenly it will simply displace everything else, and I'll go off and do it. And that's really my whole life has kind of been like that. that the opportunity you grab when you get a chance, and then you go back to, quote, normality. Well, then what happens is your life, and normality becomes you're always grabbing opportunities. And so one of the problems that we encounter, Isabel and I, is that when when we were dating, Isabel saw me as a person who could do things kind of free form, and she thought, gee, this is neat, because she was married to a guy before that it took them 2 months to plan to go 70 miles to the shore for a day. I mean, that was the way her life was. And all of a sudden, here she was with a guy who spontaneity. But what she's found is that it's way more spontaneity than she could ever imagine, because from her perspective, it looked great. But she keeps talking about wanting to live a normal life. Now, there's a movie called Tombstone, and in that movie, the one worthwhile thing in that whole movie is a woman says to Wyatt Earp, I just want to live a normal life. And he says, there is no such thing as a normal life. There's just life. And so what I say to Isabel is, there is no normal life. This is life, and this is what we're living. And my approach to life is that if I get an opportunity, I try to grab it, which means that life is what happens while I try to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And so it's always been, and that's normality. And so, again, a long answer to a question, but it doesn't bother me at the end of the year if things that I said I want to do I don't get done, because my life is always so filled with so many things that I want to do that for me it's kind of irrelevant. Life is always fascinating. It's always interesting.
Well, you've gone right on to what I was going to talk about next, which was certain different turning points or different phases in your life, so to speak. And you did mention the one, which was that decision to go to Liberia.
Mm-hmm.
You had the chance. And I, on the other hand, who should have gone to Liberia with my parents, chose not to.
Right.
And I've often thought how that changed my life and how my whole life would have been vastly different. So, thinking about that, are there any other so defining decisions that you've made in your life? Maybe the going back to Delaware?
I think there are a couple of them. One decision that really was kind of a watershed in my life was obviously getting married. I went to Europe with a duffel bag, and as I said, I came back with a couple of tons of stuff and a wife and a kid. And of course, what that brought with it was a responsibility, a sense of responsibility. And additional children were a lot more responsibility, and I was grappling then with problems that sometimes I wished I wasn't grappling with, because my life would have clearly gone in different directions. I had thought for a long time about going to the mission field. After I came back from Liberia, in fact, when I went for my interview at Bell and Howell, I interviewed, I was a student, electrical engineering, and you had to go down to this company and you had to get hired. And so what you did was you went to school 3 months and worked 3 months, and Bell and Howell was where I was going to work. And the last guy I interviewed was the director of engineering. I talked to a bunch of other people. And during the course of our conversation, he said, I noticed you were born in China. And I said, yeah, my parents were missionaries. And he said, well, why didn't you go in the mission field? And I said, well, really because my wife isn't interested in it. If my wife were to change her mind, I would go to the mission field. And at that, he said, thank you very much. And I walked out the door and I said, boy, I really blew this interview, because they were looking for people who they were gonna hire when you got out of college. They were investing in you to go to work for them. And I thought, well, I have really blown, that was a dumb thing to say, because I've blown this interview and they'll never hire me now. But they did. A few weeks later, I got a call and they hired me. Then I got a visit from a missionary who wanted me to come back to Ganta and help work with him. And once again, I turned him down. And so the turning point, I guess, was that even though I thought about going out in the Peace Corps, whatever it was, the fact was that I continued to work and provide a home and so forth for my family and my children. So I guess in that sense it was a turning away from something that I thought I wanted to do, and being a dutiful provider, but I never really liked industry. I always dreamed about eventually getting out of industry, leaving it. It was a game I didn't like. I knew how to play it, but I didn't like it. And as I mentioned, being transferred to Delaware was something that really made me mad. You know, I realized that they felt like I belonged to them, and I never felt like I belonged to them. In fact, one of the sources of criticism that I get from my wife is that had I not, they kind of viewed me as a loose cannon. I was valuable enough to them to continue to hire me, but they were always afraid of me because I didn't really like the way things were done. I couldn't do anything about it except be me, and so I would take it out in my own ways by refusing to wear a tie, little things that I could do to be an individual. And Isabel keeps saying, you know, if I'd only played the ball, I would have been promoted higher and I'd have a higher pension and so forth. And what did I get out of it? Well, what I got out of it was that at least I kept, in my own eyes, a little self-respect for myself. But I never really fit in American industry. I've always been very critical of it, and I think it's poorly managed. I think American management buys into concepts which are dumb, and but that's the way it is. And so turning points, I think I would view much more in terms of some of the books and some of the thought processes, because a lot of life has been just doing, staying alive and buying those things which are, quote, needs, cars and things like that, which take a lot of your time. And so I think that turning points, you know, leaving the church, I finally got so disgusted that I left the church and sought Unitarianism, and in a sense that Christianity for me is a backward-looking set of values, that all truth is existent in the past. If you want to know truth, what you do is you study the Bible and you look to the past. But I'm basically a pragmatist. As a Unitarian, or Unitarian thinking is much more that we are responsible for our actions. It's not that we are victims as much as we assume more and more godlike qualities, because we make decisions that, in other words, a good Christian says, what does the Bible say? And then you do what it tells you to do. Well, that's a set of rules that relieves you of responsibility. You simply follow it. There was a debate I heard one time on, is it right to lie to save a life, between moral rearmament guy and a French priest who had harbored Jews. And the moral rearmament person said, well, what you want to do is always tell the truth. The Bible says, the Commandment says, thou shalt not bear false witness. So you just always tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Okay, let God handle it. And the priest said, no, if the Gestapo knocks on your door, this is evil coming, and to tell them the truth is wrong. So lying to save a life is correct. And that leads you into what is called situation ethics, and I'm a situation ethicist. And so I have gotten away from the idea of Thomas Aquinas of kind of moral laws that are immutable, infallible, to here's a situation, what is the right thing, what is the loving thing to do? Well, as you get to that position, you get further and further away from Christianity and more to a position where you are making the judgments of right and wrong, okay? And that takes a sense of believing that you are able to make the decisions of right and wrong. So you do something, people criticize you, and you basically say, well, that's tough. This for me was the right action, and yeah.
Why did you stop him like that? Don't do that. Don't raise your hand like that when he's in the middle of a thought, and don't step on his words. I'm the one that has to edit this, and you're making it tough. When she raises her hands, finish your thought.
Okay.
Don't respond
Finish your
instantly.
thought.
Right.
When I put my hand on your shoulder,
Yeah.
don't you respond instantly. Finish whatever's there.
Okay.
And then
I keep having all these thoughts and they go out of my head.
Well, we're doing fine. Go ahead.
stand.
At any rate,
Wait, start over.
maybe I was mistaken, but I had the idea that you really, really wanted to be a teacher. And I was under the impression that when your children were grown and after you were divorced from Erica, so that then you were economically able to do something different, that you really wanted to be a teacher, and I fully expected that that's what you were going to do. Now, was this just a false impression on my part, or did you know I had that idea?
Well, I think that that was a very valid perception, because there was a time when I thought I would like to teach. I thought I'd like to teach in junior college. I think the thing that dissuaded me was the point that Bob was making this morning, and that is that in order to teach, you needed teaching credentials. And I was not willing to spend the time and effort to get the teaching credentials in order to be able to teach. But also, I went through a period of what is it that I really like to do. And I think a friend of mine in Texas said to me one day, you know what you are is a translator. What I like to do is to try to help people understand one another. I see that our society is very fragmented in a lot of ways. It's what I call the Tower of Babel. We've got all these disciplines. Each one develops its own language, and pretty soon we don't understand what the other person's saying. Person over here says something, person over here hears words, but they don't mean anything. And that's different than teaching. Teaching is you're taking people that don't know something and you're trying to help them understand. As a translator, what you're trying to do is listen to what this person's saying and this person's saying, and trying to help each person understand what the other person's saying. Because to me, communication really has to do with it is not primarily reaching agreement. It is primarily understanding what the other person is saying. Because you oftentimes get to the point where if I understand what you're saying, I may disagree with you, okay? But it's important that I understand what you're saying so I know whether I agree with you or not. It's not important whether I agree with you or not. What's important is whether I really understand what you're saying. So as a translator, what you try to do is paraphrase things. You try to listen to it and then feed it back and say, this is what I hear you saying, put it in other words. The person says, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And so what I found is, and I've gotten into this last few years, writing procedures. And writing procedures is very interesting because what you're doing is you're putting down stuff which presumably people are going to follow. They're going to do things this way. And as soon as you write it down and people can read it, then you begin to find out what they understand and what they don't understand. And so my big job for the last 4 or 5 years has been writing procedures. Now this is so alien to what I would have thought I'd be doing 10 years ago, it's hard for me to believe. But I've really gotten a great deal of joy, I guess, out of, I can write a procedure, and to me it's kind of like a person painting a picture. And then I put my name on it. You know, I wrote this procedure. And if people can read it and understand it, then I feel like I've been successful. It's not, I don't care whether they agree with it or not. What's important is that it's not ambiguous. I'm getting more concerned with grammar. I'm getting more concerned with syntax. And so I found a kind of a niche in life, that coupled with mentoring. I do a lot of, when I get younger people working with me, trying to explain to them why you're doing things and what are the consequences and what are some of your choices? What are other ways you can do it? You know, I've got a young man I've been working with who's a very conservative Christian. He's an engineer. He first thing he told me when I started working, he carries this Bible with him and he reads it every morning, and that's fine. Well, I brought him a book to read called In His Footsteps, What Would Jesus Do? And he read the book, and the book caused him some real problems because he discovered that, in fact, he was not living a life which is the way Jesus would live life. And when I left, he said to me, you know, he said, you really have bothered me. You've caused me a lot of problems. And I said, that's great. If I've caused you to think, then I've been very successful. I said, you know, it's irrelevant to me whether you believe this or this. But I said, if I have somehow gotten you to think, and so that you can make decisions as to what you believe, then I've been successful. So I think that what I used to think about as teaching has kind of evolved into not a classroom with a bunch of people in front of me, but individuals, yeah, and it's been very successful. It's been very satisfying, and like Dad, you know, I get now comments from people about kind of little testimonials of the effect that I've had on their lives, and that to me is very rewarding.
I just found a question that I was going to ask you a
Yep.
while ago, having to do with when I asked you what gave you joy.
Yeah.
Just to help me to know other members of your family better, and this is like one of those ungained questions. I was going to ask you to give me some examples of things that you thought give joy, first to your wife Isabel, and then to your children. Now you mentioned Isabel loves to work in the garden.
Right.
I didn't know this about Isabel at all, so this is interesting to me.
Yeah.
Tell me some other things.
Okay. Isabel loves mystery novels. Isabel reads mysteries. She devours mysteries. She reads mysteries. She just loves mysteries. And her favorite television program is Mystery on Thursday night, 9 o'clock on PBS. And when she's feeling tired or something, she will like to just take her book and go back and sit in her chair and read a mystery novel. That for her feeds her soul. So I would say that certainly is one thing. The second thing is that she loves the kids. The house is filled with, we have a little table and we have scissors and we have paper, and kids stick up stuff on the refrigerators, and so our house is boxes of blocks, and so we have lots of activities, but they're really activities that, so the kids, they're teaching. We don't have dumb little plastic toys. We have coloring books and things that help the children develop their mental activities. And so they come and they cut Christopher loves Scotch tape, so for Christmas we gave him 6 rolls of Scotch tape, and stuff like this, and so it helps their creativeness. So she really likes the grandchildren and likes having them around and taking them to the movies and doing things with them. So I think that in terms of what she likes to do, that's what she likes to do. RVing is something that she's liking more and more. And I think it's because we get away from the house, and she likes to see the scenery, and she also likes the RV parks, because then you can swim or go to the library. You don't have to worry about things that need to be done around the house, by getting away. So that's really relaxation.
So she likes to swim.
Yeah, she likes to swim. She loves the hot pools in desert hot springs, and she can spend hours. And she loves the beach. She likes to just go sit on the beach all day long, which I don't care very much for. Kids, I don't really know what the kids really like, because I don't know them very well. I wish I did, but it's always a problem when birthdays come along or Christmas comes along. I don't really know very much about what they think. And one of the things that really disturbed me at the Christmas party was, here's this whole group of people, not only my kids, but my nephews and nieces, and I don't have any idea what they believe or what they think about subjects that we've been talking about this morning. I would really like to see a tape like you just made for me of each one of these people that I could watch and listen to and learn what they think about the world. This is their world, but I have no idea. I don't know what my kids think. I don't know what they think religiously, and it's very difficult to get into a discussion. And you don't just come up to a person and say, "What do you think?" There's got to be a certain setting to get in, because it's kind of threatening. Do you believe in life after death? Well,
And people don't want these serious.
no, well, that's right. And yet they must think about it sometime, I would guess. But anyway, I was really disturbed at that get together, and I thought, gee, one of the things I really need to do this year, or would like to do, is to get together in smaller groups and see if we can talk about some of these issues. Not that I'm particularly interested in convincing them of anything. I'm just kind of interested in, they take these polls all the time. I read these polls all the time. 76% of people believe in God. Well, I have no idea what that means. I read the statistic, but I don't know. It doesn't say anything to me. But the people that are being polled are people just like my kids and my nephews and my nieces, and I have no idea what they believe. So, anyway, that's something that troubles me. Yeah.
Well, you have to take a guess now. Let's take Rose.
Yeah.
I have found out that she likes opera.
Yeah.
She just went to hear Pavarotti.
Yeah.
She was very excited about it and wanted to share all about listening to Pavarotti sing, especially because he sang some songs from Madame Butterfly that he knows that I love so much.
Yeah.
So now I've learned that Rose likes classical music
Yeah.
and she likes opera.
Yeah.
Now,
I didn't know that.
okay, make a guess
Yeah.
of something else that you think she likes. What does she do for enjoyment? What gives her joy?
I don't know.
Her son.
Well, yes, but you were asking me what she likes to do. Well,
Anything. What gives her joy? Let's use this. What gives
her son gives her
a
joy.
feeling of joy?
Yeah. But for instance, I don't know if she plays games. I don't know what movies she goes to see. I don't know what books she reads. I really know very little about her. And when I go in her house, I don't see any bookshelves with books. I mean, I can walk around somebody's house that has books, and I can tell a lot about them by looking at the books and the authors and the titles. But if I walk into somebody's house that doesn't have books, I don't know what they read. Now, if you see films, you get a feeling again. If you look at music, you can learn about a person by the kinds of artifacts that they have.
Sure.
But she certainly likes pictures, because she's got lots of big pictures of pastoral scenes, so she must
With
enjoy those.
beautiful decorations. on it.
Right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Don't you think she gets joy out of putting together a big travel package for somebody?
Yes.
Making all those arrangements?
Yes, she likes her work. She
That
finds it very
gives her a
frustrating.
feeling of joy.
Yes, to do a very good job. She
And
prides
working
herself.
out all their transportation and where they're going to stay.
Yep. Yep.
A big package. Somebody going to Europe, or maybe Margot and Bill on their honeymoon or whatever.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
She
So
does.
she enjoys it.
Yep. Yep.
Now, what about Cheryl?
Cheryl likes to, the first thing that springs to my mind is she likes to be able to get stuff at, how would I phrase this, value for dollar spent. She likes to buy things on sale. She prides herself on being a good manager. Clothing that's good and it fits, and she gets it for less than the average price of
That makes her
things.
happy.
That makes her happy. It makes her feel good. And she is a good manager. She's a good manager, financial manager, with all the implications. She certainly puts on very good meals.
She's a
Good cook. Good cook. And her children are well behaved. She prides herself on her children. Her children, you can take them out to a restaurant. They're well behaved. In fact, when they come and visit us and we take them visiting, we'll get comments from people about the children and how well behaved they are.
I
And
certainly noticed
so
that myself.
she gets a lot of pride out of that. She I think she gets enjoyment. She works in at school on Wednesday afternoons at Christopher School. She likes, I think, volunteer type activities, and I think that as time goes by, she's going to do more of that kind of thing. She likes to, but even as a little kid, she used to work in the Sunday school. As a young teenager, she worked in the Sunday school at Frank's church and taking care of kids, and so she is kind of a volunteer-oriented person. She likes to wear what I would call plain clothing. She doesn't dress up much. She doesn't wear dresses. She likes sweatshirts and stuff. She likes to be comfortable. She likes to dress comfortably, and she really doesn't seem to be too concerned about other people's opinions of the way she dresses. She dresses, I think, to suit herself and please herself.
She doesn't do daycare anymore?
No. No, she hasn't been doing that for several years.
So what about Chuck now? You mentioned that he was a workaholic, that he really enjoys his work, and he likes it though.
Chuck likes it. Chuck likes to work hard. He's kind of a perfectionist. He finds it very difficult to let other people do things because they can't do it as well as he can do it. It's the typical problem of any person that becomes a manager, is letting other people do things. And so I think he would have a very difficult time expanding his business and taking on more employees. He's an excellent owner or manager of the kind of business he runs because he can stay involved in all aspects of it. He would have a very difficult time letting loose of any of the aspects of it. He loves sports, plays baseball, bowls, and golfs. So he's a sports person. He just got involved not long ago in, he decided he was going to go into picture framing. So he bought a mat cutter and took on a line of picture frames and was working with a chop saw and trying to get good corners. He was having trouble cutting the corners so that they fit well, so he was trying to find the right blade for his saw and so forth. But I think he's a kind of a guy that once he gets something under control, then he wants a new challenge. He really likes starting up a business. He really, that's something that interests him.
And doing something new.
Yeah,
You're talking
starting
about
from
picture
scratch.
framing now.
Yeah.
Is he doing that now?
No, he's kind of backed off from that. He collects baseball cards. He must have, I don't know, 25,000 birthday. He's got boxes and boxes of baseball cards. He's collected them since he was a little kid. So he has just case after case after case of baseball cards. And so some of them he's framed, baseball cards that are worth more money. You know, some of them are worth hundreds of dollars, and others are 2 cents a piece. And he trades them, and he goes to sales and gets baseball cards. So he's got tons, what I would call tons of baseball cards.
So here, he's into sports. One
Yeah.
of your brother Frank's gripes always about you is
Yeah.
that you're not into sports.
Right. Yeah. Sports have no
And
interest for me.
he's so into his golf. It seems like he'll talk golf whenever there's a moment
Sure.
to talk golf, he'll talk golf. And he always has this gripe about Eddie, how he doesn't play golf and he doesn't run and he doesn't do this and he doesn't do that. You never were into sports, and he's into sports.
That's right. As I said yesterday, the sports for me, I never got into them because we moved so much, and trying to get in. I played basketball a little bit, I think, in the 7th grade, but you know, kids are in a sense very cruel to one another. When you come into a new group of kids, and they're playing baseball or something, they're choosing up people. The kid that's not very good gets chosen last or not at all. And so for me, I just, instead of fighting it, I just gave up on it and just channeled my in other directions. So like Frank, my brother, you know, I keep telling him what he needs to do is work on his chess game, or he keeps fighting his age. He keeps wanting to get better at golf, but his drive gets shorter and shorter because his age is against him. So it's high time that he begins to switch. And running, you know, he's always complaining about his heel and his knee. And I think that what you got to do is keep accommodating yourself to life. So, but going back to Chuck, yeah, Chuck has been very critical of me because as a little boy, I never played baseball with him or football with him or anything like that, and he feels that I let him down as a parent, that I should have done those things, but because I wasn't interested, you know, I read him stories, things that I was interested in that I thought were important, and I never figured sports were very important. So, anyway.
Me either.
Yeah.
And I never was any good at sports, and I was always the last one chosen, and I never was into sports.
Yeah.
And it's always fascinating to me when I hear, for instance, about somebody like Helen Charlene, who's so crazy about football.
Right.
Crazy about football. And I find such a hard time relating with it. Sports.
Yep.
So Frank, of all the 5 of us,
Yeah.
it was the sports.
Sure, but you know what Frank says? The reason that Frank got into sports is because in every other field endeavor he was in competition with his father. The one area that he didn't have to compete with his father was in sports because Dad was never into sports. So Frank got into sports as a non-competitive way of expressing himself as he grew up. And sure, as a little kid, he was interested in Olympic Games and so forth. But for whatever reason, he is into sports. And I think for me, it's kind of funny. I can pick up a newspaper in a airline terminal, and the sports section will be gone. But if I buy a newspaper, the first thing I do is take out the sports section and throw it away because I never read it. And so it's very handy because I can get the rest of the newspaper. Other people buy them to get the sports, and I take what's left over because I got no interest in sports.
Well, now I had another question that was a more serious one, and in a way you have touched on some of what I'm going to talk about. But I was thinking about the fact that you've traveled so much. You've traveled both around the United States a great deal, and you've traveled in the world a great deal. And I was wondering just generally what your feeling about mankind, the human race, is. I don't know if you're as acquainted with the musical Lost in the Stars as I am, but it's a musical that I love very much. It was from Cry the Beloved Country, the musical, Alan Patton's Cry the Beloved Country. And there's a line in there about, are we all lost here in the stars on this planet that goes around the sun without meaning? That's a line from this. And I was wondering, what your general feeling about mankind is now, about, are men, women, mankind, generally good, or are they generally evil? Are you encouraged or discouraged about the state of humanity?
Well, it's a good question. It's a question I've done an awful lot of thinking about. First, let me say that I think that we tend to look at the differences between people, but we have much more similarity than we have differences. And if we could focus on the similarities, the world would be a whole lot better off. We focus on the differences because it's obviously to the advantage of a lot of people to keep focusing on the differences. It creates enemies, and it goes back to this I thou I it business. But if you start from the idea that people they bleed when they cut, and when they're cold they are uncomfortable. If they're too hot, they're uncomfortable. What they really would like to do, most people, is to raise their children and live without fear. I mean, there's kind of some basic things that seem to be operative all over the world. We keep looking at other peoples as if somehow they're different because they're different colors, or they speak a different language, or they have different customs, and to me many of these things are very superficial. As far as good and bad, this is kind of a religious question. What I think is that, I told this to Dorothy, and Dorothy was kind of troubled by this. One thing that gives me hope is that there are other civilizations on other planets, and that God is going to look at this planet and say, let's see, these people have a proclivity toward evil, and this experiment isn't working out. And over here on this planet, I've got people with a proclivity toward good, and so we'll let this experiment just go by the wayside. Well, that kind of boggled her mind. But it seems like God or the Creator or whatever it was could have created us with a proclivity toward good without taking away our freedom. We didn't have to be biased the way we're biased, which is toward selfishness, toward evil. It's a very interesting book by Carl Menninger called Whatever Became of Evil. We really don't talk about evil very much. It's not a word that's in our vocabulary, but it appears that people have a kind of a tendency away from what I would call goodness that you have to overcome. And, in the words of Fiddler on the Roof, where he was lamenting the fact that it wouldn't really have screwed up God's plan to make him a little rich, I don't see where it would have screwed up God's plan to cause us to be more concerned about our fellow human beings. And so therefore, if another planet, there's another experiment where people are biased that way, then maybe there's hope. And maybe what God is doing is running a whole bunch of experiments, and then I don't feel so bad, because as Shell says in The Fate of the Earth, the sad thing about the destruction of the human race is that nobody will be left to lament it. I mean, that to him is the tragedy of the passing of the human race, will be nobody left to lament it. So the answer to your question is, I guess, theologically, I see the human race as a race of people who always have the potential to be better than they are. They basically start off as selfish creatures, and they have to be taught, or they have to learn to be unselfish. They have to learn to be sharing, and they can learn, and every person has the potential to be more so, but we continue to wind up with people who don't make that choice or can't make it for whatever reason, who continue to demonstrate that there certainly is evil in the world. And I guess that to me, sometimes I think the human race is stupider than the dinosaurs, because the dinosaurs really had no choice about their extinction, but the human race has the choice. They can limit population if they have the will to. They don't have the will to, and if they don't pollute themselves out of existence, they're going to destroy themselves by overpopulation, and it's going to happen. I mean, to me, it's inevitable. I hope I'm wrong, but it's inevitable, and yet it's so stupid, because any thinking person can look and see what's happening to the world, but there is no will, there is no cohesive will to solve the problem. What we tend to do is wait until we're shoulder deep in a problem, just about ready to go under, and then we really attack the problem. It's kind of the way we do things. It's got to get so bad that enough people say this is really bad that we start working on it. And you know, that's kind of where I am on this subject.
We're running out of time, and what you just said just brought up the subject of abortion. So I guess I want to get on this subject for the end of this. You know, I get so distressed when I hear about people going out and killing somebody, supposedly because they believe in the sanctity of life, they're
Right.
going and killing somebody.
Yeah.
This is so strange to me.
Yeah.
I can't understand it. We have our own discussions here about abortion, and Bob feels it's kind of a slippery slope, and he has a problem with it. And I certainly don't like it used as birth control, which I
Yeah.
understand is done in Japan.
Yeah.
But it is used as birth control.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't think this is right.
Yeah.
But my own personal feeling is it's much more important to
Yeah.
take care of the children that are alive than worry about the ones that aren't.
Yep.
I wonder what your general feeling about all of this business that's going on about it.
All right. Well, first let me say that the reason that in Japan it's birth control is because the doctors control the methods of conception. And they make a lot more money out of performing abortions than they do out of spreading birth control information. So the doctors have stifled all birth control information, and they make lots of money by performing abortions. So that's the situation in Japan.
So it really is true that they don't use the pill. They use
No, they have no access to it. The doctors won't let them have it because the doctors make money. This is free enterprise, and they make a lot of money out of it. And so this is a place that until the government steps in, that Japan will go on using abortion as birth control methods. Okay, let's come back to the United States. The issue about abortion, and I think Isabel and I agree on this, that I don't think any of us like abortion. It is not, we have a bumper sticker that says birth control prevents abortion. And I think that what I'm a firm believer in is information, is teaching people about the problems of having children, the realities of children, and trying to educate them, make them responsible, and trying to do something about it that way. On the other hand, to me, even with abortion, the rate of increase of population in the United States, in the world now, is 8,000 people an hour. And so with all the deaths from AIDS, with everything, we've got a net increase in population of 8,000 people an hour. 20 years ago, it was 6,000 people an hour. So the rate of increase of population continues to climb. So it's not linear. It's increasing. And so the question that you have is, what do we do about the fundamental problem, which is my point, too many people. There's just too many people. And if you could begin to slow down, if you could even reduce the increase back to 6,000 people an hour, if you could begin to slow down the increase, you'd be up over 10 billion people before you could even get back to the 6,000 people. So it's not a question of zero population growth. It's a question of stopping the power function, okay? And abortion is not going to do it. I mean, we've had abortion in the United States for 20 years, and I mean, in terms of the population problem, it's not going to do anything. So then the question is, what difference does it make, And I guess where I come down, I certainly don't hold with the idea that I have a human being at point of conception. I also believe that the child at some point, certainly at 8 months and 20 days, should come under the protection of the state because it's a viable human being. So then the question is, where do you come down? And I guess I come down at the first trimester. And so if it was left to me, I would allow abortion upon choice for the first 3 months. So for whatever reason, from that point on, the question becomes the viability of this embryo, this developing fetus. And I guess that the cutoff point for me would be the point where the fetus is viable, where it can live outside of the mother's body. I mean, beyond that point, it deserves the protection of the state, this unborn child.
And what are you going to do about the fact that the medical community is bringing this back further and further so that they can keep a child alive at an earlier stage?
Well, I think that part of this it goes back to this whole business of health care. If you think about the problem of life or health, and this is kind of different than abortion, if you tackle things from the point of view of money, let's suppose I have a lot of money, and I'm 90 years old, and they've got all kinds of expensive machines that can keep me alive simply because I can afford to pay for them, then the whole question of administration of technology becomes who can pay for it, okay? And it really troubles me when people who are 75 or 80 are continuing to get operations and resources are dedicated to prolonging their lives. To me, that's wrong. That somehow we need a more equitable use of our equipment. It also troubles me that people that have money can get heart transplants or liver transplants, and if you don't have money, you can't afford it. And so, because it puts everything back on the fact that if you got money, you can have anything you want, and if you're poor, you're just out of luck. But it seems to me that sooner or later, with the population, and the more people you have, the more medical problems. I mean, there's just more people with more medical problems. So now you have to ask yourself, what do I spend my money on? If I'm a hospital, what kind of equipment do I have? How many dialysis machines do I have? And sooner or later, we've got to start tackling this kind of ethical question of how do we spend our resources? Do we really work on the little kids, keeping our little kids healthy so that they get a good start in life, or do we spend our money on older people that have money, keeping them alive and trying to overcome the lack of diet when they're young? I'm always seeing kids that are walking with their legs twisted, and Isabel will say to me, "Oh, that could have been corrected so easily when that kid was little. You know, they needed to put that kid." Well, here's this person now that's walking through their whole life with a hip displacement because of some kind of elementary thing, which later on is a complicated operation. It's too late. And so I guess for me this is a whole big issue of ethics and morality, and I don't know the answers to it. But I guess as far as the abortion issue goes, it seems to me that you always got extremists. You got people who get excited. You got some person here who's got sense or a demagogue, or they're charismatic, or whatever it is, and then you got some poor sap out here who goes off and does some thing like shooting a doctor or so forth, and then the person back here, not my fault. You know, I didn't tell him to do it. He just went off and did it. So I think that good sense, you know, to me, what we have in the United States today in terms of rules on abortion are good. I mean, I happen to be in favor of the setup as it exists today. I guess I'm more concerned at this point about euthanasia. You know, I hope that nobody will ever let me get like Aunt Laura was. I hope somebody will do away with me. I would hate to exist without being able to think. And I think we treat our pets better than we do our humans. To me, it's atrocious to let adults get put into diapers, and people who, like Aunt Laura, who was once a very independent person, strap them in bed at night. And that just disgusts me. And I don't want it to happen to me.
Yeah.
But
What you just said made me think of a Picket Fences episode, which you said at Christmas
Yeah.
you never watched. Picket
oh,
Fences.
that's right. I had never watched it.
And gosh, I can't even think right now whether we have that one on tape or not.
Yeah.
But there is an episode there that is just,
Yeah.
I mean, here's this man who was
Exactly the subject.
exactly
Is that right?
the subject.
Yeah.
He was the mayor.
Yeah.
He was the mayor.
Yeah.
He has, Alzheimer's? He
Yeah.
totally is incontinent like this. He has to be wearing diapers. He forgets about everything. And anyway, it's a very moving episode because his son, who loves him dearly, goes in and sees him in this state,
Yeah.
sitting on a rocking horse,
Yeah.
totally gone, and he kills his father.
Yeah.
Shoots him.
Yep. Yeah.
And then there's the trial.
Yeah.
And we've got the Catholic priest,
Yeah.
and we've got the Methodist minister, and we've got the judge, and we've got the community,
Yeah.
we've got the little children.
Yeah.
It's so moving.
That's why we like Picket Fences.
Yeah.
So
Not all
moving.
episodes are that wonderful.
Yeah.
But
but
that
they're
one,
all thought,
that one,
most
you
of them
just,
are thought-provoking.
I mean, I wanted to sit and watch it with Frank, and I wanted to discuss it with Frank.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many episodes there that you just,
Yeah.
you want to sit with a group of people
Yeah.
and say, what do you think about it?
Right.
Now, we're getting to the end of this. I know this is your tape, not
Yeah.
my tape.
Yeah.
But I want to propose to you, just because I have something that I feel very strongly about.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you what you would think about it.
Okay.
I feel that no child should ever come into the world unwanted,
Right.
a mistake,
Yeah.
going to be unloved
Yeah.
or uncared for or
Right.
unnurtured.
Yeah.
I don't think a child should ever
Yeah.
be a mistake.
That's right. I agree.
This is my proposal.
Yeah.
I propose that all the water
Yeah.
in every community
Yeah.
causes people to be sterile.
Yeah.
All the water.
Yeah.
The drinking water.
Amen. Okay.
And that if you want to have a child,
Yeah.
you have to buy bottled water.
Yeah.
You have to make a choice
Yeah.
and do some specific things
Yeah.
that will enable you
Yeah.
to then conceive a child.
Yeah.
So that a child is never a mistake.
Yep. Absolutely.
I feel so strongly
Yeah.
about this, but
Yeah.
I never hear anybody ever
Yeah.
propose such a thing.
Oh yeah. Who was the woman? Not Margaret Mead. The woman activist in New York City that said every child a wanted child. Every child has the right to be wanted. Every child that's born has the right to be wanted. Oh God, her name will come to me. But I agree with you. And furthermore, I would even go further than that. I would say that if this country has a population of 200 million people, and we want to have a population growth of a percent, that that the people that want to have kids would all put their names into a bowl, and you would draw as many by lottery as the population you want to increase, and those people can have children.
You know, that's exactly what they were doing at Twin Oaks. I don't know if they're doing it now,
Yeah.
but that's exactly what they did at Twin Oaks.
Yeah.
Because the community was going to raise the child,
Yeah.
take responsibility
Yeah.
for the child.
Yeah.
People who wanted to have a child
Yeah.
had to sign up.
Yeah.
And then when they were told
Yeah.
that the community could
Yeah.
support
Yeah.
and nurture another
Yeah.
child, then they were given the
Then you draw.
opportunity. to
That
have
makes
another
good
child.
sense to me. But the first thing I would do is prohibit anybody from having kids,
But to think of
and
it,
then allow it to be done that way.
to think of a child ever being born because of a moment of passion,
Right.
somebody made a mistake or
Yeah.
whatever, is so wrong.
Right.
I mean, I look at this new little
Yeah.
Heather baby, and she's so beautiful,
Yeah.
and she's so wonderful, and she's such a
Yeah.
miracle.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be a mistake.
Right.
And she has every right to be loved and
That's
cared
right.
for.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, she shouldn't be here.
Absolutely, I agree.
Anyway, I feel so strongly about that.
Yep.
And I know there's too many people in the world.
Yeah.
I know there are, and so sometimes it's hard to rejoice about another child being born. David has already gone off and had his vasectomy.
Yep, good.
They've decided this is
That's
the
that.
family.
Yeah.
But, you know, I love children so much,
Yeah.
so much. But I just, every time I see all this about abortion and
Yeah.
all these people standing in front of these fights, I can't understand where their minds are or what they're thinking.
They're crazy.
It makes no sense to me at all.
Yep.
Well, this has been, I had a whole bunch more, but
Oh, okay.
we call this to an end? We can call this to an end.
All
It's
right.
almost 2 hours of talking, Ed.
Okay.
2 hours.
Well, this will be a very interesting tape to get.
Okay. So,
Thank you very
10
much.
years or so.
In 10 years.
no, and I think that, you know, if you watch something like this